Welcome to Screen Junkies News. It's Monday afternoon, and that means it's time for charting with Mr. Dan Murrell. We're going to talk about that box office.
We are, and we're going to talk about the non-box office, too, with Cloverfield Paradox. Some interesting stats and numbers, and I also just kind of wanted to break down what happened. Not just the movie. Like, what happened around the movie. Mm-hmm. Some fun stuff out there.
Yeah, this is an interesting story, but the first story remains The Rock, who with Jumanji, and you know what? I feel bad because I feel like we only talk about The Rock with this film, and the truth is, it's an ensemble
it's
with
Jack
which
Black.
everybody, it's Jack Black.
It's Karen Gillan, it's Kevin Hart, and they are back on the top of the box office. They got knocked off for a week by The Maze Runner. Jumanji's back, #1. First time since Titanic that a December release has been #1 in February. Just goes to show you how well that movie's holding up. This is also the first time that a movie's been #1 in its 7th weekend since Frozen, which was itself a phenomenon. It passed the worldwide gross of Thor Ragnarok this past week, so it has outgrossed the God of Thunder. And some fun news for Dwayne Johnson. It didn't quite get there this weekend, but if you look at the top 5 grossing movies for him here in the United States, it is this close. It is going to pass it
Take a look.
here in just a second. Let's take a look here. It is going to pass Furious 7. It's $500,000 behind, so probably today or tomorrow it's going to pass Furious 7. It's going to be The Rock's highest grossing domestic release at $850 million plus. It is also his 3rd highest grossing movie worldwide after Fast 7 and Fate of the Furious, or Furious 7 and Fast of the Fate and the 8 and the 9. Just Fate and Furious' 7s and 8s. It all makes sense.
Driving into space. And it's interesting because though this is an ensemble piece, as we say, Fast and the Furious, though, isn't really considered fully his franchise, right? Because he didn't start with it.
He didn't start with it, but I think since Fast 5, he's been viewed as Diesel's
fulcrum.
not going to want to hear this, but as integral as anyone else to the success of it.
And given the spin-offs, perhaps more so to some degree.
Yeah.
But it is an interesting thing that even though he has not so big hits here and there, I think he's an interesting movie star in that he really does have that. When he has a hit, it is such a massive hit.
It is. I mean, he for a long time, as early as 4 or 5 years ago, people were talking about The Rock can't sustain a franchise, and now he's a part of the Fast and the Furious franchise. He's got Jumanji. San Andreas did really well. These are movies now that he is carrying, if not the entire load, a substantial portion of it. And we got 2 more coming in the next few months. We got Rampage and we have Skyscraper. We'll see how those do.
They're in a good time, not a huge amount of competition. Maze Runner.
Maze Runner, The Death Cure, kind of hanging on. It is still pacing behind all of the other Maze Runner movies domestically. It had the steepest second weekend drop of all 3 of them, $10 million. To be expected. Honestly, it could be worse for Maze Runner.
There's your pull quote.
There's your pull quote. It could be worse. #3, Winchester, the Helen Mirren ghost movie, as I like to call it.
Another pull quote. I heard that Dan Murrell referred to it as a missed opportunity.
I did think it was a missed opportunity. I thought that there's a really good setup that could have been done better. That debuts at #3. Made about $9 million. However, it was reportedly made for less than $4 million, so you're probably going to get some modest return on that. The Greatest Showman, I'm just going to cement it there.
Yeah.
It's still there. It's at #4. Dropped just under 20%. It's going to pass Split and probably War for the Planet of the Apes domestically here in the next week or so. It is closing in on $300 million worldwide.
Do you know what's fascinating?
What's that?
And we've talked about this before, but I just have to highlight it again. Looking at that top 5, there are 2 films that are December releases, Jumanji and The Greatest Showman. You know what else is a December release that is not there?
Star Wars.
Crazy.
Yep.
Who would have thunk it?
Very front-loaded. Rounding out the top 5, The Post. It's holding well despite having fewer Oscar nominations than maybe was expected. It's still hanging around in the top 5. It's been there since it went out into wide release. So people like the newspaper movie.
They like those newspaper movies. You know what? We've talked about it before. I think it's a worthwhile film. I'm glad people are seeing it. Yeah. Yada, yada, yada.
Exactly.
You know what else I'm dying to? I've been dying to see this movie for a while. And now I can. It's A Fantastic Woman.
A Fantastic Woman takes the per screen contest just over $14,000 on 5 screens. This is a Chilean movie A couple weeks ago, we had a movie called The Insult, which ended up being nominated for Best Foreign Film. This is a nominee for Best Foreign Film at the Academy Awards this year. It's about a transgender woman struggling after the death of her lover. And it's not just the Oscars. This movie has gotten a lot of acclaim from international film festivals, from different critics groups. It is only playing on 5 screens, I think pretty much just in LA and New York. I'm not sure how wide this is going to roll out, but if you like foreign film and world cinema, if you're in a big city, maybe it might come near you. Otherwise, keep an eye out on the streaming networks and everything else that might find your way there eventually.
You know what we should maybe think about doing?
What's
Maybe
that?
we'll do a review roundup of some of the Oscar
Best
nominees for
foreign
Best
film
Foreign
nominees.
Film. Why don't we do
Yes,
that?
I like that.
Domestically, Insidious. Wow.
And the
Still
top spot,
top.
Insidious, for the next week or so. We'll see how big 50 Shades opens. I don't know if it's going to open to $65 million. I don't know. We'll see.
It's got a big fandom.
Black Panther's definitely going to open bigger. But for another week or two, Insidious is at the #1 spot at the domestic box office. Maze Runner jumps up a few spots. It's at number 2. 12 Strong, Paddington, Den of Thieves, Commuter. These are all going to, drop off eventually. It's very early in the year. We are getting into the point of the year. We have 3 wide releases this week. We have Black Panther the week after, and then we're rolling into March and April. And then
it's
going to
be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Just like one after the other. So
Paddington. Actually, I have to go back and look at the release dates for Skyscraper and Rampage, because it actually might be in the midst of some competition.
Well,
No?
Rampage, I believe,
Yeah.
comes out in March. Skyscraper, I think, is a summer movie. So
Yeah. We'll
it's
see. We'll
got
see.
A
We'll
lot
see.
of
We'll
rock
see.
this year. A lot of rock this year. So, Roth, we mentioned last week the worldwide box office. And I'm going to be honest, it is tough to find a consistent source of data for worldwide releases. There's some sites have some movies, and some sites list others, and some sites don't list some. So this is kind of a composite of some data that I could find from a few different places. So hopefully this is as up to date as it can be. I'm going to try to keep it as accurate as it can, but I had to pull from a couple different places because they're, Box Office Mojo lists some movies and doesn't list other movies. They consider Paddington 2 a 2018 release. It's technically a 2017 release, so I took that off the 2018 worldwide chart because that technically would be last year since it opened overseas, and then there's a few other sites that list movies. So this is kind of a composite of the worldwide look. So let's take a look at the worldwide box office so far, or at least as best I can do. Maze Runner: The Death Cure is the highest grossing film of the year worldwide, over $180 million. The other one's made over $300 million. But that just goes to show how domestic box office, not especially nowadays, not the biggest picture. For its budget, that's okay. Again, it's tracking behind the other ones worldwide. But Maze Runner: The Death Cure, #1 movie worldwide. Number 2, Insidious, which is the #1 movie here. Forever Young is a Chinese film. Almost all that money is from China. It is a historical drama. The Commuter, 12 Strong. A lot of these are coming off the strength of U.S. runs. Den of Thieves. Keys to the Heart is a South Korean movie. Proud Mary, Padmavat, which we talked about last week, from India. And then Arif v. 216, which I looked up, is a Turkish movie about a time-traveling alien robot. So there you go.
Sold.
100%
sold on Arif. I'm writing it down.
A lot
right
of
now.
those movies will be going away in the next couple weeks, probably largely due to the U.S. debuts of movies like, unfortunately, 50 Shades Freed, and then the global debut of Black Panther. So a lot of these smaller movies are going to be bumped off the chart. You're going to see more kind of mainstream, quote-unquote, films in this chart. But I like seeing these smaller ones.
I like it for now, but you're right. I mean, we're heading into Black Panther is going to be the first one that's going to kick it off, but then we're heading into a time we're hit in a 3 or 4 week period. We're going to get Solo, Infinity War, Deadpool 2. It's just going to keep on coming.
It's
so
crazy.
Cloverfield is a movie that we were going to see in theaters
In April.
and now we will not. Let's talk about what happened.
I mean, this is what we're kind of basing this video out about, is Cloverfield. It is...
It's the new normal.
It might be the new normal.
Might be.
We
It
talked
really-
about how the streaming services are kind of coming in on this distribution whole thing with studios, and how are theaters doing, and what's the future? Are theaters under threat from home viewing? This is the first kind of big mainstream blockbuster movie, that was, I don't know if it would be blockbuster in the sense of like a Transformers, but Paramount was planning a nationwide release for this film and sold it to Netflix for first run premiere. How did this happen? I figured let's kind of chart back to the history of this project, which is it was obviously not always the Cloverfield Paradox. This was a movie that was called God Particle when it was written, and at least at the beginning of filming, it was conceived of as a standalone sci-fi movie. At some point during shooting, Paramount decided that they were going to make it part of the Cloverfield universe. They shot additional material, they did some rewrites, and so the standalone movie was kind of retooled to be part of the Cloverfield universe, kind of like 10 Cloverfield Lane was. Awkwardly and unsuccessfully
forced in.
Yes. Some would say that.
Some might say that.
Yeah, it's weird because Paramount was making these kind of low-budget genre movies through another label that they ended up shutting down. That's where 10 Cloverfield Lane was when it was the seller. And so they're like, well, no, now it's part of Cloverfield. They kind of did this with God Particle. Like, we don't really have a place for this. Let's kind of put the Cloverfield name on it. It costs, estimated, say, $40 million in that range, $40 million plus. Wrapped in September 2016. It was going to come out in January 2017, and then they pushed it back to October 2017, then February of this year, then April, and then last month was when it was first reported that Netflix was interested in this. Apparently the deal was done in secret, and the idea to premiere it was done in secret, and then yesterday, boom, Netflix comes out and says, here it is. So
it was sort of like half secret, like that it was going to Netflix was a known secret.
Yes.
This premiere was an absolute, to me,
an absolute
I had
secret.
heard
I mean, there was never a story that was just like Paramount came to terms with Netflix to sell this movie 100% and it will debut here. It was always like, it's heavily rumored that Netflix is going to buy it, but nobody really knows. And then boom, you're watching it on Netflix. Yeah. It was reported, again, $40 million budget plus. It was reported that the deal for this film, nobody knows exactly how much Netflix paid for it, but the reports say that it made the film instantly profitable. So that says that Netflix probably went to Paramount and said, we'll pay you what you invested, probably plus a little bit to make it worth your time, 50 million, 60 million, who knows. But essentially Paramount cashed out. They said, we have this movie, we'll sell it to you, it's your movie, you release it, and they're pretty much done. That's kind of how we got here. Now the question a lot of people would ask is like, why did Paramount do this? Let's set the scene. This is what I like. This story is really fascinating to me. So I want to kind of set the scene as to why would Paramount do this? Why would they take a movie that has some interest? Cloverfield, these are movies that were profitable movies. This is a movie that had buzz that people were talking about. They launched a viral marketing campaign for this movie.
Can I hear thoughts?
Yeah.
And we talked about this on Screen Junkies Universe this morning, so if you heard it, you're going to hear a little bit again or slightly differently. But here's the thing. When I was watching this last night, and I was actually talking with some people about Paramount from Paramount, and they know. I mean, they've had nothing but misses last year. They had no movies that hit. They were 6% of the box office. They were not profitable. They need to make money. They're restructuring. We're looking at a complete shakeup in the studio system. We're looking at a merger between huge studios, Fox and Disney, massive market share, and they're going to need to rethink what they do. Netflix is coming in, tossing around cash, owns something outright, and then had to spend on top of that. Do you know how much it costs to get a Super Bowl spot?
I mean, generally $5 to $6 million.
$5 to $6 million on top of that just to promote it.
Yeah.
I want to hear your thoughts on why Paramount did it, but who made the mistake in my mind is Netflix, and I also want to talk about that.
Well, we'll see. Let's look at what Paramount's doing. And this is the Paramount 2017 slate to kind of set the stage. Paramount has not had a domestic market share. It had less than 5% of the domestic box office market share in 2017. The feature unit, we'll look at the numbers here, was not doing great. It hasn't had more than 10% of the yearly market share since 2011, and that ran off of the Transformers, I think 2, and then Thor and Captain America, which they lost. They lost the Marvel movies. Paramount had a distribution deal. They don't anymore. So those franchises are essentially done. Transformers is out of gas. They've lost the Marvel movies. This was their 2017 slate, and I put their worldwide gross next to their budget. If you look at it, half of the movies that they released, if you're looking at budget times 2, which is the general loss, win-loss ratio for a movie, half of their movies released last year did not make that budget times 2 ratio. Downsizing, Suburbicon, Mother, Ghost in the Shell, Monster Trucks, all pretty big disappointments for the studio. Daddy's Home, did all right. You know, $69 million budget, $180 million gross. That's fine. Transformers, that's a big margin, but not what they were looking for. Baywatch, a modest return, but not what they were looking for. Xander Cage, that's a nice return on budget. Almost all that, though, is from the foreign box office. And again, you don't get as much of that back. Rings, $25 million, $83 million gross. That's fine. But again, not a huge money earner. And if you look at their grosses of $1.72 billion, budgets of $823 million. Again, if you're going by the rule of budget times 2 for profitability, if they were making a profit in their feature division, they were barely making a profit.
Yeah.
So the question of why they did this.
And they have overhead.
Exactly. Like, they were not in great shape. Their market share was declining. So I think the first key of why Paramount did this would be to look at the situation that they're in, which is economically and financially and performance-wise, they're not doing great at this moment. So when you do the math, Cloverfield Paradox had a budget of $40 to $45 million. That's about the same budget as Arrival. Paramount had a great hit. That made over $200 million worldwide. But Michael Bay did a Secret Soldiers of Benghazi movie, 13 Hours. Had a $50 million budget. They only did about $69 million off of that. So that's the risk reward, is maybe you've got Arrival, maybe you've got the Michael Bay 13 Hours movie. Either way, it's not a sure thing.
And you watch this movie, and that's a Michael Bay movie. You watch this movie, and you know you don't have Arrival. You don't have Arrival.
No, you don't. And I think they knew that.
Yeah.
Let's look at the Cloverfield, kind of the franchise history, and see maybe what they were looking at when they were looking at this. I mentioned that the Cloverfield franchise is a pretty successful one. Cloverfield had a budget of $25 million, worldwide gross of $170 million. That's great. 10 Cloverfield Lane, budget of $15 million, worldwide gross of $110 million. That's great. Cloverfield Paradox, $40 million plus budget. The gross doesn't matter at this point. They sold it. But look at and I think this is exactly what we were talking about. When you look at the response to it, Cloverfield, 64, not a bad score. 76 on Metacritic for 10 Cloverfield Lane. That's positive. Right now, 37 on Metacritic.
Right.
That's not good. And I think they knew that. I think they knew that they had a movie that was not going to perform well with critics particularly, and I think that informed their decision on what they're going to do in this case.
Yeah, and this is a rare case where actually what the critics would have to say about it would impact if people would go to see it. This isn't a critic-proof franchise at this point, like a Star Wars.
No.
Well, Star Wars is good. I'm not saying it is, but it's pretty critic-proof. There are certain things that are. I will also, here's the thing. They also X'd out any additional marketing costs.
Right.
They didn't have to pay for that. There's a million things that they took out of their own budget and handed to Netflix. But here's where I stand on this, which I find fascinating because you can watch our review of the movie. Neither one of us thought it was fantastic.
No.
And the problem for me, the real troubling thing is whatever Netflix spent on this for this Super Bowl stunt is wasted money because they just used the biggest stunt of this iteration of their life, and they're going to be in a fight for their life over the next few years on a thing that told us, the audience, that we can't trust you, that if you stunt us and tell us, come watch our big thing, stop what you're doing, we took the time and the money and the energy to put a Super Bowl spot out, it's gonna be good. The next time you do that, I think it's gonna be a dud.
I mean, it's definitely not universally acclaimed. I think there's plenty of people that do enjoy it, but it's not like...
It's not a hit.
It's not like if it had been 10 Cloverfield Lane, for example, where people are like, oh, wow, John Goodman's great in this. This is a great little thriller. This is a great...
What a great conceit. What cool relationships. No.
Yeah. And I think when you're looking at risk versus reward on both sides, what's Netflix's risk versus reward? Well, we're paying $50, $60 million for this movie. They won the buzz. I mean, A+ on marketing, A+ on getting people to talk about your movie, on getting free marketing, essentially. I mean, I know you dropped $6 million for the Super Bowl ad, but that's what people were talking about. Well, particularly film fans were talking about, oh, it's this Cloverfield. I can watch it now? That's crazy.
Sure, and a studio might spend $50 million on a marketing budget at least.
And especially for one of these movies, which Paramount had already started it, but these movies are marketed so elaborately, and they have websites, and the more marketing you put into it, the more money you have to put into that marketing. And I think Paramount knew that they had a movie that was going to rely on mystique, on mystery, on building the hype of it. Yeah. And they knew that they couldn't deliver.
Paramount was
think.
smart.
Paramount-
Paramount was smart. I just don't think Netflix. Look here, I'm not unsubscribing from Netflix. Netflix still has amazing content. They're still a huge player in this changing landscape that we're looking at, and we are looking at a huge changing landscape because Paramount could seriously be gone in 5 years, or be absorbed, or a million different things could happen, or it could be this alternate programming outlet studio, but. I really think it was a bad move on Netflix's part.
I don't know how smart Paramount was, because look at the risk reward here. They cashed out at, probably an okay gain, but not probably a whole lot more. I mean, Netflix can't afford to pay him $120 million off.
They can.
But I doubt that they paid him $120
They
million.
really might have.
Well, I doubt it.
I don't know. I
Honestly.
mean,
I don't think Netflix paid $120 million for this movie.
They paid $100 million for the first, and these are seasons for sure, the first couple of seasons of House of Cards. They spend a lot. I mean, who knows?
But those are things they produced.
No.
Netflix made those things. Those are Netflix originals. Whereas
Netflix originals aren't always produced by Netflix. There are a lot of them are licensed, and they're actually produced by other studios. Now Netflix is making sure to produce their own content, so they're not licensing. So they own. A lot of the Netflix originals aren't made by Netflix.
Oh, sure,
that's a whole other thing.
Right, but I mean, like House of Cards wasn't a show that was made for NBC, and Netflix said like, oh, we want to buy that and put it on here. This is a movie that was made by someone else, that someone else budgeted it, that someone else paid for it before Netflix was ever involved, and then Netflix came in and just bought it outright and said, this is ours and we want it. House of Cards was, there's like, hey, we want a series, we're going to develop House of Cards, it's going to live here. That when I say like that's the difference. I mean, it's like instead of like buying something or having someone make it for you, this is going to be for Netflix. They bought something outright. They get to own that, but Paramount now, they invested what, $40 million? Let's say once you add in the marketing, $80 million on this movie. Let's say they made that back,
But they cut out, they didn't have to spend the marketing money once they sold it to Netflix.
Right.
They actually cut that part out.
I'm just spitballing here. They now cut themselves out of all ancillary benefits. So, first of all, I think they were under the assumption that this is going to be a flop, that it's not going to make its money back. So, maybe that's a smart move, but, movies that critics don't respond well to succeed all the time. I think they acted on their gut by dumping it. However, they eliminated the possibility that it would actually be a hit and make them more money than whatever Netflix was going to pay them. They cut themselves out of any DVD, Blu-ray, streaming, iTunes, any kind of home distribution rights, that's gone. They cut themselves out of any broadcast distribution rights that would be paid for the, FX or whoever to air this. That's gone. That goes to Netflix. So unless Netflix paid them an exorbitant amount of money for this movie, well above the $40 million, it was a calculated risk, and I think they pulled the ripcord on a movie that they thought they were going to take losses on. Maybe that's a smart thing for this movie, but I don't know if that is a strategy that studios can do forever, because Netflix isn't going to want to just buy every studio's terrible movies.
Not after this.
Not after this. They're not going to want to buy every studio's terrible movies that they just want to recoup their investment on and cut ties with. I mean, that's not a good thing for Netflix. So I think Netflix knew that this was going to get them buzz. I don't know how badly this reflects on Netflix necessarily that the movie's bad. It was an audacious business move on their part. But I really see it as a sign of weakness from Paramount, and it's because they're in a weak position. They don't have a market share. They have a feature film division that is struggling to make money, and they had a movie that I think they knew wasn't going to be well received by critics, and they bailed on it. They're doing the same thing, by the way, with Annihilation, which is Alex Garland's movie. He made Ex Machina with Natalie Portman. It's opening in the U.S. in February and China in February. Paramount in December sold those rights to Netflix everywhere else, supposedly because there were poor test screenings of the movie. They thought it was too intellectual for an audience, and so they have also pulled the ripcord on Annihilation, probably for a chunk of the budget, so that they're saying, we're guaranteed to make this much money back. So my takeaway from this isn't necessarily Netflix's loss, because there's so much stuff on Netflix. I don't know how much people are going to blame it that there's one bad thing. To me, it's an indication of just how weak Paramount is, and that they're willing to take any return on investment at this point to avoid a flop. That, to me, displays a profound weakness, and I think that there are people in the market that are going to watch this and see what they're doing and say, wow, they're in worse trouble than we thought, and maybe we need to take advantage of this.
Yeah, but here, my two-part takeaway from it is that But I already thought Paramount was in a really weak position, if I'm honest. Like, I already thought that Paramount
But it's outwardly weak.
Sure, yeah. But I frankly, I already thought Paramount was in danger of either being gobbled up or just folding. I mean, not folding altogether, but certainly in the world that we're in, it is in a very weak position in the market, and especially as things move forward. I think it's trying to find its sea legs. And figure out how and if they can move forward, or if they're just going to get absorbed ultimately by another studio, which they may. That was probably going to happen no matter what by selling to Netflix. And I could be wrong on this, but I assume they no longer had to take on the marketing costs for the movie, because that became then the distributor, Netflix's burden. And what I don't think this is like a fatal wound to Netflix at all, even remotely. I think if Netflix was going to pull a stunt right now, as they have Disney on their butt and they have Amazon on their butt and they got Apple trying to get on their butt, that if they had a moment to pull a stunt like that at the Super Bowl and say releasing very soon, in fact right now, in fact tune in right after the Super Bowl, they should have done it with something fantastic and been like, we're still Netflix, we are still the HBO of streaming, we still are the ones that deliver premier quality content every single time, and when we pull a stunt, you can trust it's going to be great.
But here's the catch-22. I don't think a studio at this point is going to sell Netflix something like that.
No, absolutely not.
They're not going to sell Netflix a great movie, because as a studio, you're not going to
distribute
recoup
it.
your losses and just take a modest return from Netflix. You're going to release your great movie and hopefully make a lot of money back. That's what Netflix, I think, is going to have to solve. If you want to buy movies, great. Buy all the movies you want. But right now, I think they're in a position where no studio is going to offer them a premiere movie that would do great in the open market unless Netflix is going to pay them $200-300 million, which I don't think Netflix can afford to do, because I don't understand what the upside for Netflix is, in the sense that, like, for the money they invested in this movie, are they going to get enough new subscribers that it's going to make the cost worth it, other than building their library?
But that's my point, is if you're going to do that stunt, then do that stunt well. Do it with something you made that you know is awesome, that audiences are going to be excited to see, and that are going to deliver critically and in an audience level as much as possible. Do it then. If you don't have that, don't do that stunt, because that is a missed opportunity in my mind for Netflix. It's not a fatal thing. They have so much content. I'm still going to be on Netflix all the time, but it is a thing that I think is a wasted opportunity for them. And you're right that it is an open presentation of weakness for Paramount, but they probably did the smartest thing they could do in the financial position they're really in.
Yeah, my takeaway is I think that Netflix gets a mulligan for this one because of the audaciousness. I think people are going to chalk it up as a win for them, and the fact that they were able to pull this off, and that's impressive from a company-wide standpoint. And I think that's what people are going to remember, strangely, more than if the movie was good or not. Same with Bright. Whatever you thought of Bright, I think that the quality of that movie isn't necessarily a story more than the fact that Netflix made a movie on that scale on their, as their own production with Will Smith. But where I will agree with you is that it only works once. And I think if Netflix does this again and the movie doesn't deliver, then it's going to start to build a reputation. Obviously, it has a reputation with some people already, and that's where I think they have to be careful. But, the other thing is, then they're going to have to shell a lot of money, because what studio in their right mind would sell a great movie to Netflix that could go out there in the open market and do even more? This is part of the new paradigm, and I think that's what you're going to see. These streaming networks are going to have to shell out so much money to get a movie of a caliber that people are actually going to go sign up to Netflix to watch it first run, or they're going to have to kind of settle for things like this movie that a studio will come to them and say, like, hey, we're not so sure about this. Why don't you take it off our hands?
Or they're going to make a Lord of the Rings TV show. You never know what you're going to get. But in my mind, Paramount did probably what they thought they had to do financially to be fiscally responsible. Netflix made an amazing marketing, razzle-dazzle event, but it would have been a home freaking run for them right now if it was a good movie. But it wasn't.
Well, I think the change you could see permanently at the box office is, we talk about the mid-range movies, where are they going to live? The $10 to $20 to $30 million budgeted movies?
They're going to live on streaming.
Maybe this is where it is. They co-partner with Netflix and talk about, in the sense of changing a box office in a lasting way. This is the path I see forward right now, is movies like this. Maybe that's what's going to happen to them. They
Yeah.
go to Netflix.
It's so interesting. Fun talking with you about
Yep.
this, Dan, as always.
As always.
The box office next week. What are we looking forward to?
Well, I'm not looking forward to it, but 50 Shades Freed is coming out. So we'll talk about that, I guess.
I can't do any better of an outro than that.
We'll see you next week.